Every winter, when the lakes froze over in the northern Minnesota town where my family had a cabin, my older cousin Dean and I would head out onto the ice to skate. Our parents were always inside, warming themselves by the fire, and we had free reign of the empty, frozen expanse. We'd race each other, carve our initials into the ice with our skates, and tell ghost stories while sitting on the snow-covered shore. It was tradition, a tradition we should have never broken. It happened one December, just a week before Christmas. A blizzard had rolled in the day before, and when we woke up, the world outside was a pristine white wasteland. Everything was silent. The snow had buried our footprints from the day before, and the ice on the lake looked untouched, smooth as glass. Dean, being the reckless 17-year-old that he was, grinned at me, his teeth white against his tanned, winter-chapped skin. "Race you to the center," he said. I hesitated. I was only 14, and while I wasn't scared of the ice, something about that morning felt off. The way the air smelled, crisp but almost metallic. The absolute stillness of everything, as if the world had been placed on pause. But Dean had already started skating, and not wanting to be called a coward, I followed after him. The ice groaned under us. That wasn't unusual. Frozen lakes always made noise, expanding and contracting under the weight of the cold. But this groan sounded different, deeper, like something beneath us was waking up. I stopped skating. "Dean, wait." He turned, gliding effortlessly across the ice. "What?" I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, a strange sound echoed across the lake. A hollow knock. Dean and I both froze. Knock, knock, knock. The sound wasn't coming from the shore. It wasn't even coming from above. It was coming from beneath the ice. Dean took a hesitant step forward, staring down. The ice beneath us was thick, but in some places, it was clear enough that you could see all the way to the frozen depths below. I didn't want to look, but I found my gaze drifting downward anyway. The ice was black, not solid, not full of the usual trapped air bubbles or frozen cracks. It was dark, like the lake had no bottom, like something was down there, looking back. Then it moved. I saw it first, a shadow shifting just beneath our feet. It wasn't a fish. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was a shape, long and humanoid, but wrong. Too thin, too smooth. It swam beneath us in an unnatural way, drifting like a piece of cloth caught in a current. Dean must have seen it too, because he grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my coat. "We need to go." We turned to skate back to shore, but the ice suddenly felt wrong beneath our skates. It wasn't slick anymore. It was soft, slushy, like it was melting beneath us. That's when the knocking turned into pounding. Boom, boom, boom. The whole lake seemed to shake. I could feel the vibrations crawling up my legs, rattling my ribs. The shadow beneath us was growing, stretching, rising. I could see it more clearly now, a dark, featureless form pressing against the ice, as if it were trying to push its way out. Then I saw them. Hands, pale, too pale, pressing against the ice from below. Fingers spread wide, pressing against the surface as if something was trapped beneath, struggling to break through. More hands appeared, some small, some large, all distorted by the frozen barrier between us. Dean screamed. He grabbed my wrist and yanked me forward, and we skated faster than we ever had in our lives. The lake groaned, cracked, splintered behind us. The knocking became a furious hammering. I didn't dare look back. I knew if I did, I might see something pulling itself out. By the time we reached the shore, we were gasping, our breath curling into the frigid air. We collapsed into the snow, our limbs trembling. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the knocking stopped. The lake was still again. But before we turned away, Dean whispered, "Did you see them?" I didn't answer, because I had. The hands, pressing against the ice, clawing, reaching. One of them had been missing fingers. And the last thing I saw, just before we made it off the lake, was a single, fresh footprint forming in the snow behind us, like something had finally gotten through. We never went back to that lake again, and every winter, when the ice starts to freeze, I still hear the knocking. I've been skiing for as long as I can remember. My parents met on the slopes, and by the time I was 6, I was already tackling beginner runs. By the time I hit my 20s, I had mastered some of the most challenging trails on the East Coast. I had never been afraid of the mountain, not until last winter. It was supposed to be a weekend of fun. My friends and I had saved up for months for this trip, 3 days at a remote, high-end ski resort tucked away in Vermont. It wasn't one of the more famous resorts, and that was part of its appeal. It was the kind of place only experienced skiers sought out, boasting long, unforgiving double black diamonds and narrow glades that cut through dense forests. The first 2 days were perfect. We skied from morning until the lifts shut down, only stopping to warm up with whiskey shots at the lodge. It was on our last evening that things went wrong. The lifts were about to close when we met her. A girl, standing alone at the top of one of the less crowded peaks. She was beautiful, long dark hair, sharp blue eyes, an almost hypnotic smile. She wasn't wearing a helmet, just a beanie pulled low over her forehead. "You guys should check out Elder's Hollow," she said casually, as if she had just remembered something interesting. None of us had heard of it. "It's not on the map," she continued, "but it's the best run on the mountain. Steep, fast, and completely untouched. That should have been a red flag. A trail not on the map? No markings? No signs?" But the way she said it made it sound like an invitation, like a challenge. And my friend Jake never turned down a challenge. "How do we get there?" he asked. She pointed toward the trees. "There's a narrow entry just beyond those pines. You have to hike a bit, but it's worth it. Just follow the ridge down." The air was growing colder. The last of the skiers were making their way down the main trail, leaving us alone with her. I glanced at the others. Jake was already convinced. Mark and Ryan exchanged hesitant looks, but neither spoke up. Something about her made my stomach churn. Her presence felt wrong, like she wasn't really supposed to be there. I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell my friends we should just head back. But Jake had already taken off his skis, hiking toward the trees. And I, like an idiot, followed. The trail was impossible to see at first. Just untouched powder between dense trees. The girl hadn't followed us. When I looked back, she was gone. No tracks in the snow. No sign she had ever been there. The air felt heavier as we moved deeper into the woods. The sounds of the mountain disappeared. No wind. No distant hum of the ski lifts. Just our breathing and the crunch of boots in the snow. Then we saw it. A steep, untouched slope hidden behind the trees. It was beautiful. The kind of run that makes your heart race with excitement and fear. No tracks. No signs of anyone having ever skied it before. Jake grinned. "This is gonna be sick." He clicked his skis back on, barely waiting for us before pushing off. We hesitated for only a moment before following. The snow was too perfect. It gave way under our weight, almost swallowing our skis as we carved through it. It was exhilarating, at first. Then the trees seemed to grow closer. The run was getting narrower. The slope was getting steeper. Too steep. Much steeper than it should have been. I tried to slow down, but my skis wouldn't grip. The snow had changed. Suddenly slick. Almost wet, like melting ice. Mark shouted behind me, "Guys, this isn't right." Up ahead, Jake was moving too fast. "Slow down." I yelled, but he couldn't. His body jerked violently as he fought for control. And then he was gone. 1 second he was there, and the next, he dropped out of sight. I skidded to a stop just in time. There was no more slope. The run had ended. Not into a clearing, not onto another trail. Just a drop. A sheer, vertical cliff disappearing into darkness. Jake had fallen. Mark screamed. Ryan and I scrambled out of our skis, dropping to our knees to look over the edge. We expected to see him, lying in the snow below, hurt but alive. There was nothing. No tracks. No sign of impact. No Jake. Just smooth, untouched snow. We were in shock, trying to make sense of what had happened. When the whispers started, they came from the trees, from the slope above us, from everywhere. Low, indistinct. Then the shapes emerged. Figures. Tall, faceless, dressed in black, gliding silently toward us. Ryan bolted. He didn't bother putting his skis back on. He just ran. Mark was frozen in place, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. I grabbed him and pulled. "Move." Somehow, we made it back to the tree lane. I don't remember the hike up. I don't remember how we got out. But suddenly, we were back on the main slope. The resort lights were visible below us. We were safe. Except Jake was gone. We told the ski patrol. We reported him missing. The next morning, the search teams went out. They didn't find anything. No body. No ski tracks. No evidence he had ever been there. When we showed them the place where the trail had started, the patrollers gave us confused looks. "There is no trail here," they said. We insisted. We pointed to where we had entered. There was nothing. Just thick trees and untouched snow. A week later, Jake's parents got a call from an untraceable number. They played us the voicemail. At first, it was static. Then, a voice. Jake's voice. "It's cold," he whispered. Then silence. We never spoke of it again. We never skied that mountain again. And when winter came the next year, I swore I heard his voice in the wind, calling my name. There's something about winter nights that makes the world feel different. Like time slows down, and everything is muffled under a thick blanket of silence. No insects, no rustling leaves, just the cold pressing in from all directions, swallowing every sound. That silence is what made it so eerie. Every winter, my friends and I had a tradition. Nothing crazy, just walking out onto a frozen lake in the middle of the night. It wasn't some thrill-seeking, dangerous game. We weren't trying to break the ice or tempt fate. There was just something otherworldly about standing in the center of a vast, frozen expanse, the snow-covered ground stretching in every direction under the glow of the moon. Pal Ricky and I had done it for years. We never told anyone where we were going. No one ever came with us. It was our thing. That night, the night everything changed, was just like every other time. Except for one thing. The lake was not empty. We drove out late, sometime after midnight. The roads were empty, the snowfall fresh, the air sharp in our lungs as we stepped out of the car. We had to park a little ways from the lake since a cluster of trees separated the road from the shore. It was never a long walk, but I remember that night. The short hike felt different, wrong. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not just quiet, true silence. The kind that makes your ears ring because there's absolutely nothing to hear. No wind, no distant cars, no wildlife, just stillness. The second thing I noticed was the snow. It had been falling steadily for hours, yet as we approached the lake, we saw no tracks leading onto the ice. No signs that anyone had been there. The surface was pristine, untouched, smooth, as if it had been waiting for us. Kyle was the first to step onto the lake. He stomped his foot down hard, testing the ice. It groaned beneath him but held firm. "All good," he said. Ricky and I followed. The lake stretched far into the distance, its surface so smooth and glossy that it reflected the pale moonlight. It felt like walking on glass, like stepping into another world. We made our way toward the center, laughing, joking, our breath curling in thick clouds. Kyle was talking about some girl he had met. Ricky was lighting a cigarette, and for a few minutes, everything felt normal, until Ricky stopped walking. I turned to see him standing completely still, his head tilted slightly, eyes locked on something in the distance. At first, I didn't know what he was looking at. Then I saw it too. A shape, far across the lake, near the edge where the trees met the ice. Something was moving. A dark figure, hunched over, slow, methodical, dragging something behind it. Kyle squinted. "What the hell is that?" Nobody answered. We watched in absolute silence as the figure crept closer to the ice, still too far away to make out any details. It was big. At first, I thought it was a bear, but then it straightened up. It was not a bear. I don't know what made my stomach drop first, the unnatural way it moved, or the realization that whatever it was wearing something. A costume, a full bodysuit, thick and shaggy, like a taxidermied animal thrown over human shoulders. It looked like fur, dark brown, matted, like an old bear pelt. It moved with a slow, deliberate stride, dragging a small black bag through the snow behind it. Ricky whispered, "What the F asterisk asterisk asterisk?" Kyle took a step forward. "Hey," he called out. I wanted to tell him to shut up, but it was too late. The thing in the fur suit stopped. The silence stretched between us. Then, it turned its head. Not its body, just its head. A slow, unnatural twist of the neck, revealing a face that was completely wrong. I couldn't breathe. Its head wasn't covered in fur. It wasn't even a mask. It was pale, white as the snow, the skin stretched impossibly tight over its skull. Its eyes were sunken, black pits, like two gaping holes drilled deep into the face. And the mouth, Jesus Christ, the mouth. It wasn't smiling. It wasn't frowning. It was just open. A perfect, gaping O, like a silent scream frozen in time. We didn't move. We didn't breathe. Then it did something that sent ice-cold terror straight into my bones. It dropped to all fours. One moment it was standing, the next, it collapsed forward, hands and feet slapping against the ice. And then it ran. Not toward us. Not away. It ran in circles, moving fast, too fast, its limbs jerking unnaturally as it scuttled over the frozen lake in a wide, erratic loop. It never took its eyes off us. Its mouth never closed. The three of us were frozen in place, too terrified to speak, to move, to do anything. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. It stood still, arms and legs splayed out awkwardly, head cocked at an impossible angle. Then, without a sound, it grabbed the black bag again and dragged it onto the ice. It moved closer, and that's when we ran. None of us spoke. We didn't need to. We sprinted across the ice, our boots slipping, our lungs burning. I could hear my own breath ragged in my ears, the pounding of my heart drowning out everything else. Behind us, the ice cracked. A long, deep splintering sound. I looked back. It was standing right where we had just been, watching, not chasing, just watching. And then it did something I will never forget for as long as I live. It raised one long, skeletal arm and waved. Not a normal wave, not a friendly gesture. It was a slow, mocking motion, a taunt, as if to say, "See you soon." We didn't stop running until we reached the trees. Kyle fumbled with the keys, yanking the car doors open, and we tore out of there so fast we nearly slid off the road. Nobody spoke on the way home. Nobody said a word about what we saw, but I know we were all thinking the same thing. It wasn't just some guy in a costume. It wasn't a trick of the light. And the bag? We don't know what was in it, and I don't want to know. I haven't been back to that lake since, but sometimes, in the dead of winter, when the world is quiet and still, I swear I can hear it. That slow, deliberate scraping, like something being dragged through the snow.